Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Cappabianca and I went to business school together, and we're still friends.
Separated by a continent and an ocean, but that's all.
Yes.
Anyway, Joe,
please tell us about Ingenion and SymActive Bladder Management System.
A medical device company based here in the UK. We have been going for a few years, and we are developing a new approach to urinary control in the area of catheters. There are a lot of different ways that urine is managed, but catheters is our approach. But there are some big problems with the way things are done today that we think our approach will be solving. So the title of solving urinary incontinence is a pretty bold statement. I'd like to think we're going to be doing our contribution to that. So it's a difficult area to talk about, and it's not a sexy thing like cardiology or other stuff, but it is a massive problem. And more than 200 million people suffer from some type of bladder control problem. They really fall into two categories: incontinence, which is the thing that most people hear about and are familiar with because it's slightly more common. Incontinence is you can't control when you urinate, in that it flows out uncontrolled. The other is, which means that when you need to urinate, you can't. And medically speaking, that's a more complicated one and potentially more risky, because you could end up rupturing your bladder, and that becomes a massive complication and can be fatal. But the complications from catheter usage create a huge amount of infection, and those infections as well cause other problems, including death, as well as blocking hospital bed days and so on. But mostly it's seen as being quite inconvenient, dehumanizing. It's very costly. It's a big market. And like I say, there are some serious health risks to it. It affects an awful lot of people in a number of other conditions, be it something like MS or Parkinson's, or people who have spinal cord injuries. So it works across a number of other medical conditions where this is an ancillary issue that has to be addressed. So like I say, the Foley catheter has been around for about 100 years or so. Those are the tubes that go in and are often attached with a bag to collect the urine externally. The other method is using an intermittent catheter, so that, and this is particularly for people with urinary retention who have problems urinating, where they have to actually insert a catheter each and every time they need to urinate. In both cases, it can be painful, humiliating. With respect to Foley's, you can end up having infections and blockages. Because this happens to people, and they, particularly in the elderly community, this is one of the things, having a catheter, which causes them to not want to drink as much. They end up getting dehydrated, and that then causes other problems. So all of these things combine for some really big issues. And it's, our approach is very different. One of the most important differences about our device is that it's designed not to extend outside of the body. You can see there on the left-hand side of the screen, this is what the device looks like right here. It's very flexible. It's designed to stay, but as opposed to the Foley catheter, which uses a balloon that's filled with liquid at the top, we have an open, flexible cage called a Malacot. And the difference there is that it allows the patient to get a complete void from their bladder. So with no residual urine staying in the bladder, there's less risk of infection in the bladder and less risk of blockages resulting from either biofilms from bacteria or kidney stones and other types of crystallization of the urine. But the most significant innovation that we've got is right there, which is the valve, which is a small ball bearing and a little washer. And it's activated with an external magnet here, so that the ball bearing is moved out of position, opening the valve, and then the ball bearing moves back into place every time because the ball bearing itself is also magnetized.
I have two questions. You
Yep.
said it's not external to the body. What are those like strings?
So these little strings, it's actually suture material. They are trimmed once the thing is inserted, but it is those that are used to grab the device to withdraw it after a month's time.
I see. After a month.
But they can be trimmed to being just within the external meatus, or they can be left out. It's really down to the clinician as to how they want to deal with that with the patient and their convenience.
The clinician inserts this. So if I were to use your product, I would have a monthly visit to my doctor.
Not necessarily. The very initial insertion will almost certainly be by a urologist, but we're expecting that a trained clinical nurse, urological nurse, would be able to do the exchanges just like they do with Foley's. But ultimately and eventually, we think that patients will be able to get trained to do it themselves, because there are an awful lot of people out there who are trained to insert intermittent catheters in themselves, on multiple times per day.
Right. You showed that.
And we don't think this is going to be that different. Yeah. And like I say, the really important difference about our device, aside from the valve, is the fact that when the urethra is not in use, which for most of us is most all the time, it's a flattened tube that has a mucosal membrane. And having the existing types of catheters that disrupt that mucosal membrane is what causes the conduit for infection. And our device is designed to work with the body so that you don't have as many infections. Not to say none, but certainly fewer.
My next question, I imagine it's rare. I don't imagine there are lots of magnets around people's genitalia in general, but that magnet that you held, could it in fact be anything that's magnetized? Could release the ball bearing?
Technically, yes. So, for example, this is contraindicated. You don't go into an MRI machine with one of our devices in. That would be very bad. But yes, if people have asked, if you lose this device, what do I do? Any strong magnet could activate the valve. But again, if you lose it, then we'd say you probably want to withdraw this and go and get a new one and get a new what we call actuator.
Mm-hmm.
So we think now is a really good time because the current device that we've got is expected to be CE marked, hopefully in Q2. This is subject to all of the issues that we and loads of other companies are experiencing with respect to MDR. Our own notified body is themselves awaiting their approval, but we've been through a pre-review with them, so we're confident that our device will get CE marked this year. It is a Class 2B device in Europe, Class 2 in the US, which means that it goes into a natural body cavity, but can be withdrawn within 30 days. And it's a 2B device because we're expecting that patients will use the same device again and again, just like with contact lenses are also Class 2B devices. So we're going to be generating revenue later this year is the expectation. And the nature of our revenue model is that once a patient starts using our device, they will become a recurring revenue stream source for us. And that will allow us to get to profitability very quickly. In terms of reimbursement, we're actually currently exploring that through the UK NHS by working on a feasibility study initially, and that will lead us into hopefully reimbursement through the UK NHS. We've got a number of patents on our device, and this is not the only product that we've got. We've recently won 2 grants to develop 2 new products. Another one for the male anatomy, which will deal with incontinence, and one for the female anatomy, and the lead on that is incontinence, although we think that device will also be suitable for women who have urinary retention, although that's a very, very small part of the market.
You used the term incontinence for this presentation, and you said a grant for male incontinence. What would the new product be? How would it be different?
So because this device was originally designed by someone who was experiencing urinary retention. This is really good for what's known as non-neurogenic retention, meaning that you've got an obstruction from either, let's say, in a large prostate or a malfunctioning sphincter muscle that won't release, won't open when you want it to. Because those are the conditions, there's very small risk of any leakage around the outside of the device once it's inserted into those types of patients. For patients who have absolutely no urinary control, no sphincter tension, at all, there is a risk with this current design that there could be leakage around the outside of the device. That also could be for men who have gone through a TURP procedure, which is a transurethral resection of the prostate. So they've had an enlarged prostate. Then with the surgery and the scarring of the urethra that might happen, you might have a less than perfect seal around the outside of the device. So the grant that we've won from the NIHR will allow us to develop a new device around this sort of basic platform. The same valve will be used, but ensuring that we've got certain sealing techniques incorporated into a new device so that there's no leakage around the outside of the device once it's inserted.
I'm interpreting what you said as what you held in your hand will address the first 80% of the market, and the grant will help you reach even more difficult cases.
So our first device helps us to address the male retention market, which is, yes, bigger than incontinence in men, and it's more important. But the male-female split, so there's women have more incontinence than men have more incontinence than women. So this might be, let's say, 25% of the global market, maybe 30% of the global market. Then male incontinence is going to be, 20% of the global market, and female incontinence is the other half or more. So our other grant project for female incontinence will really open up the market even greater. So in terms of the team, there's, aside from myself, our CFO, Zia Merceline, we've identified a really high quality woman who will be joining us later this year as COO. And then we've got some external advisors who've been working with us. And once we've raised the funding that we're looking to raise right now, we are going to be building out our team. We're in the process of hiring a commercial director who is someone who has experience commercializing products, hopefully as well in the urology space specifically. In terms of our board, and we've been building a medical and scientific advisory board, Sergio Rothstein is our interim chairman and our major shareholder. It's in fact the impetus for this whole company came about because it was his brother-in-law who actually designed and invented the very first generation of our devices. Barry Clare is based here in the UK, former main board member of Boots Company, and involved in an awful lot of other interesting early stage medtech and biotech companies. And Mike Ehrlich. In terms of the medical and scientific advisory board, we've got George Yardy here in the UK, Kurt Neighbor is in Germany, and Nicholas Erde in Argentina. And Dr. Erde was one of the people who did the most recent clinical study of our first generation device, putting it into 10 patients in Argentina. That experience helped inform the current generation of our device. In terms of the market, it's quite a large market, almost 7 billion pounds overall, and that's where we can get to now with our two new products. Global male urinary retention market, like I say, is about 1.3 billion. In terms of what we think is addressable in the UK, it's probably about a 300 million pound market. And we think that by 2026, we could get near on 20 million pounds in revenue. That would be predominantly on our lead product, but by that time, we'll have the other products coming into the market as well. So in terms of where our products take us, on the male products are on the top there. So the original generation device was around back in 2018. We haven't really commercialized that because the original device has a much larger valve. If you see that there, that's all a big chunk of metal. It's pretty uncomfortable. And so we redesigned it into the new device, which has about 85% less metal. And then we're developing in 2022 these two new products under these grants. But we think there's more technology innovation to do off into the future, including maybe being able to determine how full a patient's bladder is, and maybe other things as well that we could sense in the device. Someday we also might look at changing the nature of the valve, so you don't no longer need to carry around a big chunky magnet, where you might be able to do it from an app on your phone. But that's a different set of technology development we're going to be exploring someday. In terms of where we're focused in markets, you can see here colored the markets that we're going to be focusing on in the nearer term. Germany is really an interesting market because they have, on a per capita basis, more urologists than just about any other country in the world. You have to read that right-hand column in reverse order in terms of the number of men per urologist. A lower number means you have a higher concentration of urologists.
Right.
The reason India is on there is just to highlight that's where you don't want to have urological problems, because it's pretty hard to find a urologist in India. But Argentina, on a population basis, is roughly about the same size. So it's a pretty attractive market, and we have some good contacts down there. But really focusing in Europe, in the UK and Germany and Ireland are probably our lead markets that we're planning on for Europe. And eventually getting to the US once we get our 510(k) in order, which will probably be sometime towards the end of next year or early 2024. The way we're looking at going into the market is by going to private urologists first, really for wealthy patients who are able to pay for this, regardless of whether or not the insurance companies are reimbursing for it. Although we are going to be looking for reimbursement because we think we've got a strong economic case for that, and talking to Nick about that sort of thing. But also looking at those patients who are already using some type of catheter device, or when it comes to incontinence, those who are severely incontinent. Let's say if someone is trying to manage with pads, absorbent pads, there are those who are using 8 to 10 pads every day to manage their incontinence, and that's just not a good way to go. So we think that those are dealing with those difficult patients first. They will also become very stable and long-term customers for us, and we think that over time we'll get into other users for catheters, eventually getting to maybe even acute hospital settings. We've had some really good feedback, particularly when we went to apply for our grants. The grant reviewers came back with some very flattering comments. Medical Trade Group is a group that we're looking at having be our distributor in Argentina and elsewhere in South America. And the Eastern Academic Health Science Network is a UK body who have looked at our business opportunity and had some nice things to say. So as I mentioned, we've had some good success on the grant funding front. Last year, we had a £100,000 grant from the UK government that helped us get this lead product to a CE mark position. And then in January of this year, we kicked off the FemActive Seal Soft project to develop that female incontinence device. And then just last month, we started the male incontinence project. So those two are running in parallel, and both of those projects should complete around this time next year. What that will do is bring us to a point where those products are going to be ready to be CE marked, but that'll take another maybe 6 to 9 months to go through and complete the technical files on those two products once we've got them defined.
You're getting £250,000 in a couple of weeks?
That's the reference to, no, that's applying for the feasibility study that I mentioned.
Oh, I see.
So we're going to apply for that sometime in Q2. Now that project is actually being led by our partner SNEFT, which is an NHS Trust hospital group. So it's really when they're ready to do that. That said, they're being very supportive on our current two projects. So we're actually very fortunate to have as much of their time as we do currently.
Remind us, please, when was the company formed?
So the company Ingenion was formed actually in 2013. It was, again, with that first generation device, it was really by 2018 that it was realized that we needed to do a redesign of the product. I joined the company in November of 2019, and it's since then that we've really been pushing things forward.
And how much has been invested in the company so far, when you include these non-dilutive funds from grants?
Okay. Before we include any of the current grants, it's about 2.5 million pounds. So that includes the 100,000 from last year. So these two grants give us nearly 400,000 more. And we're raising up to 2 million pounds. And that 2 million pounds will help us hire more people, build inventory, and commercialize our lead product and finish completion, complete development of the two grant-funded projects. But that funding will be used, some of that will be used obviously next year as well. It's not all used this year.
Thank you.
So in terms of what we've done so far, aside from that 10-man clinical study in Argentina, there have been other in-man tests of that first generation device. There was even a 2016 paper published on that device. We've filed additional patents since 2018, one on the delivery mechanism that we've got, which is a good patent that I think is going to be very useful for us. And we think we're going to be looking at new patents out of the work that we're doing in these two current grants. So we think we're going to get our first sales later this year. That clinical study that I mentioned, working with the SNEFT group, and as I mentioned, late 2023 for FDA in the US, 510K, we think.
Okay.
And so in terms of our financials this year, and again, this is subject to getting the CE mark in place, we should generate maybe about $500,000 in revenue, but still be loss-making, get towards break even across 2023. And although our EBITDA doesn't look like it's moving up very much in 2024, that's because we're going to be building more of our infrastructure to manage quite a aggressive sales growth, which is going to take some infrastructure on our part. So we think that we'll start seeing the fruits of that into 2025 and 2026.
But fewer than 2,000 recurring patients doesn't seem that high to reach break even.
No. So the way to think about that is
that's one of the most promising numbers I've seen in the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. If you think about it, when the average selling price for our device at 240 pounds per month per device, it may sound like a lot to some people who are familiar with the price of a Foley catheter, but on a monthly basis, most people who are using intermittent catheters are spending much more than that. In the UK, we are estimating about 300 pounds a month on intermittent catheters. So with that number of patients on a recurring basis, that's a pretty healthy core cost base. That we
intrigued by your pricing decision to be less expensive than that which is inferior to you. Is that just to get a foothold into the market?
It's a number that we think is useful, that won't raise too many red flags, if you will. So we want to be roughly comparable, but we think that then we'll also have other advantages in terms of patient convenience, lower risk of infection, and other things that will give an even better sale. But we always think that if we went in at a premium price, you'd have to be talking about the
Well, even premium,
price.
I mean, you're at 240 versus 300, you're looking at a 20% discount versus what the market currently bears. And this is a better product. So why did you make that choice?
Like I say, it was just our feeling of where we thought the market would bear. And to some extent, you could also say that relative to an intermittent catheter, one of the reasons that intermittent catheters have been used more in the UK than Foley's, they've been taking share quite considerably, is because they don't have as much nurse intervention required, because intermittents, basically people are taught to self-catheterize. Although we think we can get there, right now, our advice is that there will be a need for a nurse once a month. So, you could actually look at it and say, okay, well, how much is that going to cost? Are we more expensive on that basis?
What is an intermittent catheter's monthly cost per patient?
Well, if they're using them 5 times per day and they cost, especially the coated ones and things like that, they'll be £2 per device. So that's that gets you to 300 pounds. Yeah, in 30 days.
Okay, so Foley's and intermittent are at price parity, basically.
Now, Foley's are I have a slide on this. Foley's are less expensive, and they will. So hold on, let me skip forward to that. So here we go. So a Foley catheter is only about 20 pounds, and it'll stay in for a month. But on an annual basis, a Foley patient will expect, on average, to get 2.7 catheter-associated urinary tract infections per year. The cost of an average cost of a cavity treatment is about £2,000. Now, some of those are going to be a lot less because it's just going to be, oh, here, have some antibiotics. But some of those will also, that average number includes hospitalizations for multiple days that may lead to a bloodstream infection and include possible death. So across, when you average it all out at £2,000 on average per, that means that the Foley on a monthly basis is going to cost the healthcare system £470 a month.
It's very intriguing that you are grouping in the cost of infection as the overall cost per patient. I didn't think it that way.
Yeah, so it is a massive part of the overall cost to any healthcare system.
Sure.
And this is something where we might be able to pull Nick in and see whether he agrees with the way I'm making these calculations, maybe towards the end of the presentation.
Oh, well, you get to leave a little early, but yes, I agree.
Okay. And like I say, we think that we've got some other advantages of incontinence retention. Our product will be used for both incontinence and retention. There's no external bags. There's no continuous drainage. And that actually plays back into the overall idea of bladder health, because the bladder is a muscle. And when you have a Foley in there with a bag, you're not giving the bladder that same natural filling and voiding process, so the muscle can atrophy. I've actually had a call from somebody who's been on a Foley for a long time, and he said his bladder capacity has diminished so much, he actually thinks that our device might be useful for him to retrain his bladder to get it to hold a little bit more each time and re-expand. And that's something, again, we hadn't thought about. We're going through that process now with these 2 new products, where we're actually speaking to patients to gather their insights on what's not working right now for them with the current standards of care, so that when we're looking at designing these new products, that we're going to make sure that they, as much as possible, reflect what the patients and the clinicians are looking for. And that's, I skipped over a couple of those other slides. I don't know that we need to go through them, but like I say, this is where we're going to be using and spending our fundraising that we're looking to raise right now.
I'm going to bring Jan on screen. She has a question for you on the repetitive use of the same device.
stuff there. Yeah, you said you could have repetitive use of the same device. So I'm wondering how the people are going to sterilize those devices at home before they reinsert.
All right. Sorry, no, if that's what you understood, I apologize if I misspoke. What we're saying is that within class 2B, you're using a similar device each time. Ours is a single use device, and when you withdraw it, you throw it away.
Okay,
So
that makes
you're
me
not
feel better.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, I was a little. We initially thought we might be a class 2A device. But when they explained that, well, even disposable contact lenses are class 2B, I'm like, okay, I'm happy to be a class 2B along with contact lenses.
So are you're ETOing the device?
Yeah.
What does ETO mean for those who don't know?
Ethylene vinyl. Oh no,
Ethylene oxide.
ethylene oxide. Yeah, I can't even think today.
Yeah.
Ethylene oxide. So the other thing I had was magnets are really difficult to ship. So I'm just wondering if you've gone through that whole rigmarole, because very strong magnets are not considered safe to ship in most cases.
I'd have to talk to my ops people about that, because I haven't. In fact, I was sending them an email just today because we're at the stage where we're talking to distributors, going into CDA with them, and they want to see a product sample. And I said, well, how many of these do we have that we can ship? Because again, we need to make sure we've got enough of these in stock as well. So I will find out about that. But like I say, our chairman, who I mentioned, is a big proponent of the quicker we can get that valve to be a Bluetooth device, the better in his view. So, and that would,
yeah, that has a lot of other issues that you have to get into.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I can see those being hacked and problems occurring.
Just to embarrass a speaker.
Yeah.
Okay, between those two things, I was just wondering how you were handling that. When you said repetitive use, I'm thinking they took it out and put it back in, and I'm going, oh my God.
No, now actually, I will say that some people do that with intermittent catheters, and it is again a source of problem for them, because, and even when they're putting them in fresh, they're not necessarily doing it at home. So it's maybe a clean environment, but it's certainly not a sterile environment. And some people's idea of a clean home is different from others. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you do know that Stryker, or maybe somebody, will figure out how to reuse those catheters. So just be aware. And I know people that make it very, very difficult to keep them from being able to figure out how to re-sterilize for reuse. So something to think of for the future too.
Well, you say that, but interestingly, one of the other aspects, like I mentioned, of our delivery device is that if they were doing that without our delivery device, they'd have to be violating our patent. Because
they'll get your delivery device too then somehow and figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
It's just something they tend to do, because then it brings the cost down for people.
Thank you, Jan. And Eddie, this is why I love this forum, because I doubt that there will be packaging engineers among your typical audience. And so for Jan to be able to contribute these things. Girish, you had a couple of comments. Thank you, Jan.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Eddie. First of all, a couple of assumptions that I'm making before, which I would love your feedback on whether my assumptions are even correct, because otherwise my question is irrelevant. I assume that I think you referred to the magnet engaging the device as actuation. So if I can use that term kind of loosely here, I assume that the device actuation failure is undesirable, correct? Because that kind of defeats the purpose of the device. Yeah. Further, if it were to fail, I'm assuming then that there's immediate medical attention required, either via an emergency room visit or or if they're already in a facility, some medical attention. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, probably, because again, if the patient is in retention, they're going to need something. And oftentimes when someone experiences retention for the first time, it's an emergency room visit because they don't know what's wrong and they can't pee and it's getting bad. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my question becomes then, is there a need to be able to monitor the number of cycles that the magnet is used to actuate the device and sort of ensure that there's not some sort of failure that could occur, either through misuse or overuse or et cetera?
Well, I mean, this current magnet is a solid state, it's a solid block magnet. It's not like an electromagnet.
Mhm.
So, I don't think that this is going to demagnetize anytime soon. I don't know how long it would last, but I've had this one myself for a couple of years, and it's absolutely, I have to keep it away from everything because it's so strong. It's a question I haven't been asked, but it's something we can think about. Yeah.
I guess I was thinking more about the device that's the catheter that's inserted, not the external magnet. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. So the little ball bearing inside there and whether that demagnetizes.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, well, the failure of that is actually less likely. And here's why. Because although it is magnetized and that helps it to move back into position quickly and efficiently, it is a sphere, and the valve seat that it goes into is angled. So it will inevitably, like any ball bearing going down a drain, it'll go towards that low point.
Mhm.
And then the heat of the body actually warms up the silicon material. And we know that we get a very, very good seal in that case. So the external magnet for actuating is always going to move it out of position, again, because of it's important that it has that ability to click back in place. But if that were to fail, it's not as big a problem of failure. And again, the reason that that's not as big a problem of failure is because what would happen is if it stayed in the open position, which I really can't see how it would, you'd end up only having incontinence, and that's not as life-threatening as retention.
Retention,
right?
Yeah. Okay.
You're a great addition to the group, and maybe you can convince Jose to let you come to 10X so we can have you there in person.
I'll talk to him. Yeah. No, and I recognize that seemed more of a technical question, but I think what piqued my interest was the cost comparison right on slide 17, because depending on the amount of failure that you would expect, that you would have a long-term cost impact associated with the necessary hospitalization for retention. So, well, thank you.
Barry, you had some additional comments.
So, when we were talking about the health economics of it all, you can throw figures around, but actual NHS resources or any hospital resources this day and age, when it's an acute emergency, you can't put a value on that. And particularly with catheters blocking, which traditional Foley catheters do, even if it's supposed to stay in for up to 3 months, typically 6 or 7 weeks catheters block. So it could be an emergency situation, can damage the kidneys ultimately. And actually there isn't the accident and emergency time to deal with these things with everything else that's going on. So that, you can throw around a few figures, but the actual reality of it is you can't put a price on it. If you can cut down the number of admissions to A&E, which is quite high, by a device that will prevent all of this. And I also believe that Ed's device has got a much wider lumen. The internal diameter of it's much wider, so it's not going to block as easy as a traditional catheter that has a separate airway to blow up a balloon and deflate a balloon. So that's another reason why it's not going to block.
Thank you for that. And Wendy, I rarely promote folks who aren't part of the premium network, but you had some nice comments in there, and I thought this would be a nice way to meet you. I just sent you a message on LinkedIn as
Yes.
well. So share with the group what you wrote.
So I actually started my experience in the medical device industry in incontinence products, where we manufactured those single-use devices all the time. And I remember specifically attending a state fair event
What year are we talking?
in Minnesota. And one of the ladies in the restroom took her catheter and washed it in the sink and stuck it back in the bag. And so this is amazing. I'm so excited to see this come to development, and it's just, I can't believe how exciting this is. So great job. Thank you.
Thank you very
What do you
much.
do today and for whom?
Today, I work at Nelson Laboratories in Salt Lake City as a technical consultant for a broad range of different medical specialties: hospital reprocessing, microbiology, packaging, and sterilization.
Yes, I see that I guess unsurprising, some of our common connections are Jan and Nick.
Yep.
So that's a nice cross section of
So
if you're
yeah,
free in May, be sure to come out and meet us in person.
will do. So thank you very much for the creation of this product. So
Thank you, Wendy. Those are great comments, and I think we'll sound clip you and put you onto our website.
Yeah, we're gonna absolutely.
please do.
One of the things that I'm so excited about what we're doing is that, as I mentioned briefly in the presentation, there are so many people with so many different conditions who end up needing catheters. And the real problem is that it's the catheters that end up, ultimately causing people's deaths. A very dear friend of mine who had progressive MS ended up dying of pneumonia that he caught because of a persistent catheter infection. And so although he had MS, it was the pneumonia that killed him, and the pneumonia came from the catheter because of the MS. And so it's our feeling that if we can develop something that gives people a better chance at being healthy and managing their conditions overall, we're going to have other really important ancillary knock-on effects to healthcare systems, where we think that it will be difficult to measure those, but we think that we're going to be making a change in a lot of people's lives.
It's a powerful story. You might incorporate that into your presentation. And thanks for sharing this with us today. Any closing comments?
Like I say, we're in the middle of a fundraising now. I'll
You're looking to raise £2 million. How much, if any, how much has been committed, if any?
So one of our existing investors has already committed £100,000 of that. We literally just kicked it off this week. We're having a online pitch event on the 23rd, and an in-person in London pitch event on the 30th. So hopefully within the next few weeks, we'll have a good sense of how much.
And how can we tune into the online pitch event?
I will post that into the links here. Is that?
Eddie, thank you very much. Folks,
So,
next week I
thank you.
will be on holiday in Finland. I will not be here, but Michelle Lott knows how to work the controls around here, and she has a very compelling presentation about the end of EUA. And if you have anything to do with the emergency use authorization around COVID, there's some FDA guidance that's come out that is very unclear, that there's confusion at the agency as well. And it would behoove folks to download a letter that she's written and submit it under your letterhead to maybe help you save yourself a lot of aggravation. So that's next week, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. Ed, thank you, and thanks all for tuning in today. Make it a great day. Bye.
Take care. Bye.